Committee. This is our subcommittee for our trash and our landfill situation that we are discussing. At this time, I will read the Governor Lee's order. This is the subcommittee of the trash is being conducted electronically pursuant to Governor Bill Lee's Executive Order 16. I will need a motion and a second to continue this meeting for the public safety and welfare in light of the coronavirus.
So moved.
Second.
We will let this stand for our roll call of attendance also. Please call the roll, Rachel.
Commissioner Blair?
Yes.
Commissioner Dodd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harris?
Yes.
Commissioner P?
Yes.
Commissioner Sherino?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Piercy?
Yes. The purpose of this meeting is to go over some changes that were to be made to our RFP from our last meeting. I don't really see a point of going over the entire draft, so I'm going to turn this over to Becky and let her go over the points that has been changed, and we'll have discussion on those if you have more changes we would like to make. Becky?
Thank you. We'll just start with the handful of changes that you all requested from the last meeting. And those start on page 2, and we're looking at the draft dated October 15th. The first request was in the last full paragraph of the public education section to change the 60 days to 90 days as far as the public education plan to be submitted. So that's been changed to 90 days. The next change was on page 4. We included the hours of 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sunday through Saturday for collection at the convenience centers, but I then listed all of the locations. I do need to include the 2019 numbers. I have not put those in yet, but those I do have marked for myself to get those from MAC. The next change was on page 7 at the bottom where it says facility capacity. We had originally said for the first 10 years of the contract, and the decision was made that we would ask for 25 years of capacity, so that's been changed. I do want to point out at the top of page 7, there was a request that we would be able to inspect facilities every couple of weeks or every 2 weeks. This is a sentence you'll see in 2 different places, but the sentence I've changed to say, the county reserves the right to inspect collection facilities upon reasonable notice, provided such inspections do not unreasonably interfere with the operations of the proposed facility. That gives you the ability for flexibility. If you want to inspect it more often than every 2 weeks, or if you want to inspect it every 2 weeks or every month. If we want to change that back to 2 weeks, I'm glad to do so. There wasn't a time frame in there in the beginning. It was kind of an open-ended, but this gives you, it's a little tighter, but it doesn't give a time frame. So if we want to put 2 weeks in there, I'm glad to. On page let's see, the next one was, that reference is also on the top of page 10 in county inspections. I just wanted to point out that's the same, that you can inspect it, that you do have a right to inspect the facilities, and that's just with reasonable notice.
I can go get you one. I can get one in just a second. I can go down and get some. You make her, okay.
Sorry. And I'll cover the next couple, but then if we need to go back, we can. Okay. The transportation piece, which starts on 11, we had talked about making sure that they follow designated truck routes. That is second paragraph. While within the boundaries of Rutherford County, the successful proposer will route transfer vehicles on major thoroughfares or highways. That was something we discussed that we could potentially, narrow down and be more definitive or more clear in the actual contract if needed. We can certainly change that here if you want to. And those were the changes that I had on my list or my notes. I had a couple of other things to ask you all about as far as this document, but are there any of those that I missed or anything that you all see that I did not make changes to?
Mr. Nolan?
Page 12, under Landfill and Reclamation, bullet point number 2. All debris is to be removed from bedrock.
Mr. Chairman, they need to use their microphones.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. Landfill man and reclamation, bullet point number 2, all debris is to be removed to bedrock. That would be dependent on what we plan to do with it after it's removed. If we're needing that dirt for something, then we may want to capture that dirt. If we're not, we just want to dig it down until we get the environmental issue situated and stop.
Are you recommending a change to that language?
I think it's going to depend on what our intent is.
And that was one of the things I've got, the bullet points here I'll end up needing to put in a narrative. So one of the things I wanted to touch on was, are there any of these bullet points that are accurate, that are not accurate, that you see need changes to be made? I do agree with Mac. It does depend on, how much work do you want done at that landfill site. It does depend on what you decide as far as, do you sell it? Do you keep it? What do you plan to do with it once the remediation is complete?
Does TDEC have some authority in that decision as to what happens to that reclamation material?
There would be some special waste out of that area, I would expect. Would be manifested, tested, whatever needed to be done based on what it is, some soil possibly. But other than that, no, sir. They would give you options of where to take it and what to do with it, but not everything there.
Dodd?
So their TDEC's observation would be to get to a point of no contamination or something like that, which may start above bedrock.
Yes.
Did our borings go to bedrock, or did they go below the trash layer? Do you recall?
Bedrock.
We do have a general concept of depth of material to bedrock.
Correct.
So hypothetically, if it was reclaimed and it went to bedrock, how long would that inspection process stand when it hit bedrock? I mean, they're going to monitor it, I understand, but how long would they monitor it?
On depend. When our landfill was installed, in a lot of places it was never dug down very much, and it's going to depend on how much compaction of the clay they actually did. So the leachate, how far is it soaked through? And once you get down to where it's not soaked through, we should be able to stop, because there shouldn't be any contamination any further than that. If it's soaked all the way to bedrock, and then it's ran along the top of the bedrock somewhere, more than likely. But that's just something we'll find out once we get there.
Will we not need a clause in this somewhere that protects the rest of the landfill other than the 70 acres of trash? They need to leave it in as good a shape as they find the rest of the property and the road. because it's going to be a lot of traffic on your road, on the county landfill road coming out of there. They could come out there and mess up the whole 288 acres trying to do away with 70 acres. So
that's kind of where I'm going with it. Becky and I talk quite often. I don't know if y'all realize that or not, but there's some opportunities depending on what we want to do. It's potentially we could do some agricultural type stuff out there, hydroponics, because we're next to the river. There's a lot of opportunities once we get that gone, but it also depends on what the plan is elsewhere, for that piece of property. So depending on what we're going to do with the property is how deep we'll need to go and what we'll need to prepare for the next life of that property.
Todd.
Thank you, Chairman. That's a major decision because we don't know what we're going to do with it. So it could be thousands of cubic yards that we'd have to fill with something else. Granted, the dirt could be of some value to us or to a republic, but we got to put something back in the hole unless we're going to fill it full of water. So your point's
There's
well
a possibility.
taken.
And the other thing you want to think about, not sure that it's going to go that way, but we had one of the presenters that talked to us about doing some research facilities on the property next door. So we may want to be a part of that, but doing something completely different from what they're doing. Still research, agriculturally based, that type of stuff.
I would propose a bullet clarity. What page was that, Mac?
On
Page 12.
So then I think we could craft another bullet or edit that bullet to say excavate to limits of contamination and a cubic yard price to go to bed, or cubic yard price for any material thereafter, or something like that. So and perhaps some method of quantifying the cubic yards that are still in place. But you're right, would y'all be comfortable editing that bullet to make it open-ended or get a unit price?
Any comments?
It's going to be pretty expensive no matter what we do with it. But depending on what we're going to do with it in the future, if we need to have level ground or slope ground or whatever, so we may wind up with a deep pile of soil to bedrock over here that we may need to remove some of that to fill in a low spot that we have. So we may wind up going almost to bedrock all over. But I'm fairly confident it's not going to be real smooth when we get there. So it'll be probably some fields and some hills and valleys to settle out and smooth.
And the rock's going to be pinnacles too. Just so you can look next door, see it's going to be pinnacles. So
One of the things with the idea of the hydroponics and a farm type environment, agricultural type environment, is that you also feed the public education piece. So you can also gather your agriculture students at both the grade school or high school level, as well as your MTSU folks that are already looking at potential research and other things in that area. It just kind of partners with them as well. And that's something a little different than what's been done with landfill space before. Typically, it's a golf course or a park or something like that once they're capped and closed.
So we'll edit that one bullet, and then Steve, your bullet concern was to add some language for limits of construction so that they don't damage what's beyond the footprint.
Right.
Becky, if we can grab some.
Got it.
Back to Steve's point, I agree 100%, but it may be some elevation needs that would affect some of that other to make it fit in better.
Mac, can you walk us through what it would be like if we reclaimed the landfill, but as far as what they're going to do, where they're going to put it, and then are they putting it back? So I know somebody has bid or in the RFI about reclaiming the landfill. Can you just tell so people out in the public know exactly how that would work if we allow somebody to fix it instead of selling it?
But through their RFI proposal, it was pretty simple. It was only 2 pages long, so it didn't go into great depths. But their proposal was probably a little more than what we would want to do. They wanted to put in a dirty MRF, so the stuff that came out of the landfill would go through the MRF situation. First, it'd go through a trommel screen to get a lot of the dirt out of it, and then the trash would go through a dirty MRF to recycle what you could recycle and dispose of what you could, anywhere else, and then you're still going to have some remnants that you have to bury. So in their RFI would be to build another cell on the landfill to bury what they couldn't get rid of. What they had in there was to continue building the landfill for us to have another C&D site or another landfill class 1 facility, whatever we chose to do. I'm not sure that's what we would want to do with that property, but that was part of theirs. I've talked with them, and they're willing to adjust and kind of fit our needs if that's what we want to do, something different from that. So we've got some opportunities there.
The material that they would have to put in a new landfill site there, could that not be trucked to another landfill out of this county?
Yes, sir, it could be.
Would you think that would not be probably a more reasonable situation than investing in a landfill site that's put in correctly?
Yes, sir, it can be. The only major opportunity that I can think of to having landfill space there would be for some disaster that we've got a place to go. Don't necessarily have to have it anything in there, though. So you could still truck away what you're speaking of, truck away, and you could still have a permit sitting there that's just like Wilson County's sitting on one that they've never used. We could do the exact same thing. And if the disaster hit, we're ready to go. If nothing hits, then that permit just sits there. We pay the $1,500 a year or whatever it is just to have it.
Does that explain well enough, Mr. Harris, or do we need more?
What I'm confused with is where is the staging site going to be when they dig it up and they got to put it? Where would that be? On the 260 acres that we have?
Yes, it would stay on that piece of property. One of the early things that we would have to do is go through a geotesting, hydro testing type situation, just like you would be putting in another landfill. And if it doesn't meet those qualifications, then we're out. There's not going to be another landfill there. You can still dig that up and move it somewhere else. The environmental issue is my dream, to make that environmental issue go away, to where this county and our future residents don't have to worry about what mess we created there 50 years ago.
So it's your opinion that it would be best for somebody to take it over and be done with it?
Not necessarily best, because we don't know what they're going to do with it after they get done with it.
My thoughts on that is we do not need to relinquish the ownership of that property ever. It's like a gateway to a badland. If we turn that loose, that opens up 300 acres on the other side of it that landfill company already owns, and then it exposes it to another 450 acres beyond that. And as it stands today, the gate's closed. They can't enlarge their footprint. They can use every inch they've got that they can permit on what they own today, but they can't get any larger width-wise. They can't cover more acreage. They can go somewhat taller, but they can't get out. The river's got them on the backside. The county road's got them on one side. Jefferson Pike's got them on the front. And the small creek's got them on the far side next to Walter Hill. I would have loved to have had the map, but I didn't ask Mr. Nolan to bring it tonight because I didn't realize I was going to get into this. But this is very serious, to hold the ownership of that landfill basically at any cost. Everybody in here is probably getting some, yep, I said any cost, believe it or not. Everybody in here is getting calls now from the smell. I mean, it's really stretching out. And it's because it's getting higher, and it's because of the product and the amount of product that's going in it. If it expands out to another 3 to 5 to 700 acres of trash, 50 to 75 years from now, Rutherford County will be ruined. You won't be able to live in, you can live in it if you stay in your house, but you won't be able to come outside. That's what they're dealing with on a close fashion there now, probably 5 to 8 mile away. They're already smelling it. I've had multiple calls this week on it, further than I've ever had out before. And it's trying to be blamed on other stuff, and I'm not saying it's not, but I am saying it's not all other stuff. We need to hold our county landfill. Whether we mine it out, whether we sit on it, or whatever. Because as soon as we let it go, if we sell it to a third party, somewhere down the line, their program doesn't work, they're going to sell it to our neighbors. And then here comes the trash. We're already taking 33 counties all through Middle Tennessee, all their trash. We're taking from out of state. Well, they are. We're not. We have no control over it. I think our commission body would have adjusted that some time ago. But we don't need to let it continue. That would become a mega land sale, one of the biggest in the United States, if we turn our county landfill loose. Now, that's my thoughts on it. Of course, it's closer to me because I'm the commissioner of the district, and I know how all the land lays and who owns the land. But that's my thoughts. Mr. Harris.
Making sure you say it's your opinion.
It is my opinion. I would love to see it come to a vote someday, and I would appreciate the support for the 2nd District and all of North Rutherford County, because it's affecting the whole end now. And,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. P?
Yes, I don't know if you remember last time we met, or maybe the time before, I asked the mayor if he had got any information on what could happen if that landfill was sold. Now, I don't know if what you're saying is speculation or if that's fact, Steve, and that's what I was trying to ascertain when I asked if our folks could get with the state and find out for sure what could happen if we did let go of that property. Because I'm like you, I don't want to see it expand.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Blair?
I don't know if we've asked this before. If we have, I apologize, but say we get into this process and we choose an entity to serve us. What happens if we have another situation like we did for the Easter tornado, where there's so much debris that filled up this, took so much of the life off of Middle Point? Do we as the community, be it Murfreesboro or one of the other municipalities or the county, do we pay that entity to put this debris in a catastrophe like that?
My suggestion, of course, it's worth just my suggestion. Davidson County did a long ways when they had the big flood. I would do a little different from what they did, but they picked Warner Parks, and they took all that debris and put it into parks and stored it until they had an opportunity to see what it was and what they needed to do with it. Then the white goods, the metal type, appliances, they got recycled. The mattresses and the bedding and all that kind of stuff went to the proper disposal places. They brought grinders in to grind up the wood products and all that kind of stuff. So if we plan ahead, which we try our best, and we have it in our disaster plan, the school board kind of messed us up. Rockville High School pad was going to be where we'd put everything. Well, they put a school there now, so I don't think we can put our debris there anymore. But have a location other than a landfill or a storage location, and then get through the major disaster, take a breath, think about it, and then do the most prudent thing with it.
Dodd?
Craig and Steve have just really highlighted how, and Robert, what's speculative and what's not. we're going to have an official opinion from TDEC or someone on what can we do. If it's mined, it has to get re-permitted. For instance, we've had that conversation. We need to know that authoritatively. If we mine it back to bedrock or whatever, is it automatically still a level 1, whatever the terminology is? Is it automatically still a landfill, or do we have to re-permit it? We need to know that definitively, and we don't know it clearly yet. If we own it, or if it sells to Republic, do they automatically get a permit? Do they automatically get permission to go across Landfill Road? Do they automatically get a permit to take the Matthews or the Reeves farms? How do we know authoritatively what these consequences are? Is it a secretary of, I'm sorry, I don't know the entities, but the Attorney General's opinion, or an attorney, or who can answer that for us?
TDEC is very well aware of what I would like to see done with the landfill. If we decide we're going to bury more stuff in there that's class 1 type stuff, then we would have to get a permit. If we're wanting to bury stuff, which we've already said we really didn't want to bury anything else in there, test what we're digging, and if it meets the class 3 standards, we already have a class 3 permit. So, you can pull stuff out of class 3 and make room to put in some more class 3 stuff if you need to. But yes, there will be some permitting involved. And TDEC is very willing to help walk us through, and it takes a while to get a permit done. So the very first thing that they would want is a conceptual drawing of what it's going to look like, and a really in-depth description of what the plan is. That way they could read through that pretty quickly and give you an instant thumbs up or thumbs down and help you get through that process. What happens in that permitting process is if you've got, I think they've got 280 days to turn a permit. So when you turn that permit in and they give it back to you, hey, you need to fix this. Well, that stops. That time clock stops until you receive it again. So if you're getting that permit back 4 or 5 times and you're taking a couple of weeks every time, you just extended the life of that permit. So it would behoove us to have a really, really good idea of what we're going to do and have somebody that really knows how to draw those plans correctly to get through that process as quickly as possible.
Is that because our permit has expired?
That's on any permit.
I mean, has our landfill permit expired?
Our class 1 permit is closed.
Closed.
Permit still exists, and we still get inspected often, and we still have to do all the monitoring and everything else. The class 3-4 permit, they've changed the title to class 3. It's still active. We only take brush and tires, but we're not putting anything in the actual C&D, but as far as they're concerned, it's still active.
If we were still open somehow, would we have to have a permit to go further with it, or what?
What do you mean by going further?
Well, if it was still an active landfill and we made the decision to mine it out, would we have to get a permit to do it that way or not?
On our class 3 landfill, if we decided to start taking things out of that, they don't have anything in their regulations about removing waste from an active landfill. Now, the actual closed landfill, it's closed. So if we're going to do any changes to that, we've got to go back through all the processes.
But in an earlier conversation back with TDEC, like a year ago, if we're improving, which would be taking out dirt, taking out trash or whatever, it's easier, if I'm correct, Becky, correct me, or if I'm not, correct me, it's easier to get a permit in that situation to better your surroundings and ground and property, and taking that out, either putting it on a liner or taking it and running it through a MRF and through composting and all those different type things that you can think of, that the state is open to making it better and safer for a longer period of time. So, I mean, it's that attitude and atmosphere of, yes, technically you have to have a permit, but it's going to be easier instead of opening a brand new landfill to start taking in your solid waste, your household trash or whatever, than it is to take it out. You're recouping the dirt, you're taking the trash, putting it either on a lined, sale, or you're composting it, or you're recycling it, or whatever. So that was what was said like a year ago. No matter whoever does it, if we do it, somebody else does it, or whatever, because it's making your property safer and better for the public welfare of the citizens of Rutherford County, and the water source that you're at too.
Okay. I appreciate the input, and I have another question. You seem quite knowledgeable on this part. If Republic wound up with our county landfill, would they have to re-permit it, or would it just be an extension of what they've got going on now?
From my understanding, yes, they've got to re-permit it.
No, they just apply for an extension of their current permit.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
It's not just simple as that, though. I mean, there's a lot of hoops to jump through. I mean, there's, your water source, as well as your retention ponds, your water wells, your gas monitoring wells, your leachate. I mean, everything has to come in play on that. It's a much extensive deal to extend a permit than it is to what we're talking about, recouping the landfill.
They were going to take the landfill, somebody would have to do the hydrogeo study to see if they would even be able to have another landfill on that piece of property. That would be the first step. If the testing came back to where, yes, you can, then you would start the permitting process, or in their case, the expansion process.
Okay, thank you.
To expand on that, so you said a moment ago that TDEC looks more favorably on an improvement to a landfill and might be more streamlined in approving a new Class 1. That would hold true if Republic acquired it as well, correct? Is there a high probability that if Republic acquired our 70 acres or all 260, is there a high probability that they would successfully acquire or retain a Class 1 permit on our land?
Depend on the hydrogeological study, and then it would depend on their plan. The 280 days is the maximum time that TDEC has to approve or deny. If you go in with the perfect plan and the paperwork written up and everything else, and whatever time it takes them to look at it, they could have it back to you in 2 months if you turned in everything correctly. So that 280 days is going to vary on how well a job you do with your planning beforehand.
They could do it.
But this morning I had a meeting, and so I ran into the gentleman, asked me, about the landfill and so on and so forth. And I told him, he mentioned about the smell too, like Mr. Chairman mentioned. But I was at on the top of when we toured the Republic, the smell was fresh air and so on and so forth. So he's happy to hear that we are working on the landfill.
The smell is just about everybody's concern right now. It's just stretching out further and further.
That's also TDEC's concern if we start digging up ours. We would have to, whoever's digging up our landfill would have to have a plan to capture the leachate, methane gas, stormwater, and odor.
They probably leave the odor off. It's not being caught now.
So I would just add for the TDEC conversation, 2 things. Number 1, anytime you can improve the environment, that's their goal. So regardless of whether it's digging up a landfill or permitting another landfill, whatever that is, they want to make sure that it's built to the position where they're going to protect the environment. So whatever the better decision or the better option is for environmental protection. That's what they're going to do. That's their role. I am glad to reach out to them. I don't make any promises, but I'm glad to reach out to them and ask them if one of them would be willing to come and speak to you all, or at least be here to answer your questions directly, so that you would have a person that is well-versed on what they do internally as a department, as part of our state, to actually answer those questions clearly, and you would have the opportunity to ask your subsequent questions if you'd like me to do that. I'm glad to offer to do that.
Does one person do that, have that authority, or is it a group of people?
Usually a group of people. There are field offices throughout the state that are assigned to certain areas or certain counties, and then we also have the state office in Nashville that would be the commissioner and the deputy commissioner and those folks.
But perhaps one person could come and have enough awareness of their program, they could answer yes or no, or I'll get back to you.
Yes.
So it could be maybe one person,
Yeah.
Steve, that sits in with us.
To at least get an idea, because I've reached out to them and they were helpful. They were interested. They're obviously interested in what this looks like at the end of the day. Again, are you digging it up? Are you building a new one? Are you selling it? Are you leasing it? They're as interested as we are. It's not their decision, but they're interested in what that decision becomes and what that, what that consequence is for them as far as what they need to do from their standpoint.
Well, I continue to waffle to back and forth on this. Our RFP, we've elected to leave it pretty open-ended, cast a broad net and get proposals in. And then, like tonight, I'm thinking, man, we really need to know more precisely what our desire, what our wish is, or our demand rather, for the 70 acre or the 270. So perhaps we don't need to chase this rabbit hole down. If we're going to leave it open-ended, then we just need to move on and to have this conversation again when we get proposals. Then we start narrowing it down.
We can work toward that.
Then I digress on that whole topic.
Fair enough. Everybody in agreement? Okay. Did you work through all the changes? Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add for a change or suggestion on the RFP?
Mr. Chairman, you
Yes, sir.
did want Becky to ask TDEC to
Yes.
see if they could come?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe our next meeting, or I don't know when, it might be
We
too
don't know when
soon.
they can come.
We can throw out a couple dates here at the end of your meeting of
Okay.
when we're meeting next and see if we can get them into that meeting if possible.
Blair?
This may actually be a conversation if we're going to vote tonight and approve this RFP. My question may be better served at the end, but I'll go ahead and ask it now.
Go ahead.
I had a citizen that has been watching us and called me after our last meeting because I had brought up the accountability piece, and they didn't think that the answer was concrete enough. And again, if we hire an entity to just say a one-stop shop that takes care of everything, the convenience centers and all, what authority do we have to make them keep our centers clean and to make sure that the operation is one that the county can be pleased with? So again, they didn't feel like we had a solid enough answer to that question.
So this leads us into page 13, which we had talked about unit pricing. I think Commissioner Harris had brought that up, which also led me to an example where contractor performance was part of the RFP. And this is as detailed as the performance standard violation. It's just a chart, if you will. Failure to distribute public notice at least 5 days prior to a service startup date. They get one occurrence or one failure to do so, and it's $250 a day for every day that they missed or every day that they don't comply. Failure to provide minimum recycling or yard waste service, they get one occurrence, and it's $500 per day per customer request. Collection of overflow trash without customer notice and additional service fee, they get 3 occurrences, and it's $500 per customer is the liquidated damages is what they call it. Failure to clean up, and this is just me reading a few of these off. Failure to clean up vehicle leaks within 48 hours of occurrence. They get 2 of those, 2 times the cost of cleanup incurred by the county. Failure to maintain vehicles that are clean, sanitary, covered, and in good working order. They get 3 occurrences or 3 notices, $250 per vehicle per occurrence. So that's the type of thing that other places have instilled and actually included in an RFP. I've seen that included more often in contracts, but there are a couple of RFPs out there that have gotten that detailed, and we can certainly do that.
Do those figures, do they have enough teeth? Is that enough of a penalty to make an entity behave?
I think it depends on the entity. It depends on their resources.
Becky, is that something we need in the RFP, or is this something that we negotiate after we get all the RFPs in?
I've seen it done both ways. Mostly I've seen it done in contracts, but I've found 3 or 4 RFPs in the past few days that have included it in the RFP to say this is what we would expect, and this is, this is how important this is to us, kind of like our public education piece has become. I'm glad to include it here, or I'm glad to continue that conversation and we include it in a contract.
Unless the committee wants it included, I don't insist on that, but it was a question that I was asked that I did want to be answered publicly. So
Thank you.
I'm good with the contractual part of it.
While we're talking about that, I have a question on this. Just say we contract with ABC to do all our convenience centers, and we have nothing to do with it. We're out of the convenience center business. It's theirs. Say they run it 5 or 6 years and wake up one morning and say, we're not making any money, we're done, we're out of here. And all our stuff, all our trucks have set and went to pot. We have no employees to run the centers. Is there any way to put something in there to absorb the financial expense of us having to pick it back up? Because it will take a while.
That has happened. That has happened more than once. Doesn't happen every time. What I will tell you is there is an opportunity to put in liquidated damages to the extent of so much money per day per household or so much money per day per person, whatever that piece is in the contract. At some point, if a company recognizes or realizes they're not going to get a contract extension, it may become easier or cheaper for them to step away. But in that case, they would still have the piece of the contract where you actually are receiving financial support for what they've put before the county as far as added need for resources.
You think that would be a discussion in a contract, best place? Okay, thank you.
And I just, if I may,
Go ahead.
I think that's the risk we take of privatizing some of these. Is, this could be the downfall of that step, like the probation office. Ultimately, we needed to take it back.
You can see it here locally. West Main Street Center, operated by the city of Murfreesboro, that is not ours, and it's closed about as often as it's open because it's full.
And that there is a balance between privatization and public ownership and responsibility, and there is a balance there, for sure. I think when you consider that solid waste collection, regardless of whether it's curbside or at a convenience center, that truly is the place where every resident in your community touches your county. Again, whether it's at the curb or at a convenience center. And I think that's important to consider when you start to look at what does that look like? What is that image? What do you want that to be? And
Mr.
it's
Chair.
not cheap. I'm not going to say that it is by any means.
Mr. Harris, did you have something?
Might be a legal question, so I doubt you can answer it. But Mr. Piercy brings up where people bringing in trash from other counties. Does the county or any county that you know of make a company have a permit for other counties coming in? Here's my point. The reason I say that is because if other counties, they had to have a permit to come here. They call it host fee, that might be to them, but to us, we had to have a permit. So if people do violate some of these things that we're talking about, $250 a day, $500 a day, then instead of a $1 billion company worried about $500 a day, take away those permits to where they can't bring any trash in here.
Back in the late 80s and early 90s, Bedford County required every garbage truck that passed through their county to be permitted, and the permit was $5. And it went on the vent window. You remember when trucks had vent windows, and you had to get it permitted every year. And they did a little DOT inspection to make sure your lights and brakes and all that kind of stuff worked. When Davidson County had the thermal plant running, they had the trucks that went there had to have permit stickers on them. So to answer your question, yes, there's counties that have done it. I don't know if any of them continue to or not.
There are
Mr.
counties
Chair.
that have done that.
Yes, sir, Mr. P.
While we're on this line of thought, one thing that comes to mind is I'd like for us to retain veto power on whose garbage we would accept or what type of garbage we would accept. You know, for instance, we got into the problem where there was, the nuclear waste that was brought into the landfill. Of course, that's kind of an extreme example, but, if there's, say, waste coming out of Davidson County that was untreated sewage, that kind of thing. I think we need to retain the ability to say, no, we don't want that in our county from whatever entity we work with.
Becky, does that need to be in the contract or does it need to be in RFP?
I think it could be either place. The contract is probably more appropriate in this instance, just in my opinion, and Mac may have a different opinion. I would say that when you start to limit the amount of garbage that's coming in, you can expect the price to be a bit higher, only because all of a sudden you have a company, especially if it's a private company, that are trying to cover their expenses. They're going to have the same amount of revenue coming in to cover those expenses. So it's either fewer customers paying more or more customers paying less, if that makes sense.
Flip side to that is if we were the proposer, we may want to know that little tidbit of information beforehand. They can, put in some language where we discuss it later or whatever, but just to let them know that we have that thought in mind so they kind of prepare for it. We've talked before in the past about special waste. The state's definition of special waste is any waste that is hard to manage. So when the Good Friday tornado came through, all that debris was considered special waste because it was a whole lot of it and hard to manage it. Was it harmful? No, it was not harmful at all. It's just took more manpower, more equipment, more airspace, those type things. Special waste that comes from these industries where they do some treatments of some type or some plating type things, and they wind up with these sludges. They charge those companies more to take that and accept that than to do regular garbage, because they have to manage it a little bit differently. They have to mix it with stuff, or they, depends on what it is, they may have to bury it separately. So some landfills like to take that stuff because it's a high dollar volume. If you remember when we went to East Tennessee to Sevierville, I looked at their process. They have all their waste that comes in from their partner community at a certain price, and then the outside waste comes in more expensive. And what they tell us, they wanted it to be waste to energy so they can charge them more money to accept that. So it's a revenue producer for an entity that is accepting those type processes.
More discussion?
So there's this one section on page 13 that's new to this document. And this just speaks to an example of what would potentially or could potentially be in a contract for quoted unit pricing or for the pricing piece that you asked about, Commissioner Harris.
Talking about this evaluation right here?
The unit pricing verbiage on page 13 on the back, the very last page.
Not 13. I mean, this is something, I mean, I agree with this, I'm okay with this, but I mean, I'll be a little bit more thorough on contract.
Yeah, well, we need to be.
A lot more thorough, but yeah,
This is just an example.
yes.
Steve, do we want to clarify Matt's or Mac's suggestion that we allude to we may restrict out of county? Do we want to put that in this RFP? Is that information that the proposer needs to have up front?
In order to give a price, I think they would.
Robert, you want to see it in the RFP, some reference to the potential no out-of-county material, or just limits, or any language you want to see in the RFP?
I can live with it being in a contract, but, you know, that's something I'm very strong about. I want to be able to say no to something that I find unacceptable coming into the county. For one thing, you know, Mac was talking about landfill, what would accept. I'm not planning on voting to extend another landfill in this county. So, you know, y'all can think on that all you want, but, you know, that's my thoughts on it.
We need to remember that we're asking these proposers to give us proposals and start business here without getting our trash. They're going to have to come up with the private industry trash within or without side of the county to make their business run until, and I'm fairly confident we're not going to give up that free disposal, you know, at Middle Point until it goes away. So if we bring those companies, if we allow those companies to come in, we're going to have to let them find their trash somewhere. Now, what Commissioner P's talking about, I understand completely. You know, some of the special waste, the harmful waste, hazardous type stuff, TDEC should help regulate that pretty easily, but it still wouldn't hurt for us to try to have it in the contract as well.
Mr. Chairman, I think too, on when we were talking about in the RFIs, we were wanting to keep it open and broad to bring as many participants as we could to our adventure here. And we've always said from day one, I think, you know, it's not just one piece that makes the puzzle. It could be a number of pieces to make this a puzzle or a finished piece, so to speak. So we're hoping for composting, you know, facility, and we're hoping for recycling facility. There may be 5 pieces, 5 different companies, you know, to take care of that. That's our thing. We're in the saddle here. Rutherford County is holding all the cards, whatever you want to say, to this adventure and to this RFP. And, you know, Rutherford County, this committee and county commission has the ultimate say at the end of the day what this contract looks like, or what's in the contract, what we want to do for the future of Rutherford County. So I think we keep trying to regulate our RFI, and then we've gotten out of that. Now we're trying to regulate our RFP. We're trying to keep it open enough, and we're going to do it however you want to do it, plain and simple, but we're trying to keep it open so we can get, what we have, 13 participants in the RFI?
13.
12 or 13?
12 or 13.
We're hoping for 18 or 20 or more to come in on this RFP. and just to put in on an RFP. So we got options. It's more than overwhelmed me. I was thinking we might only get 2 or 3, or 4. And that's all we would get in the RFI. And when we got 13, I was like, man, this is exciting. We have options. We have opportunities. We can look at all these things and nitpick them and put together a contract that we want, that you want for Rutherford County in our future. So I know Becky's been struggling with it. I've been struggling with it. Mac's been struggling with it. Because each time we look at a sentence, we try to put in a regulation in there, but every time we do it, it might knock somebody out from participating, and we can knock them out through after we get the RFP of we need this and this from your company, and hopefully we have 20 companies we've got to do that way. That's going to be the tough work after these RFPs come in.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
And I go along with that same opinion. I think Becky and Mac and, of course, the Vice Mayor have all done their due diligence to put together probably as good a document as can be put before us at this time. Anything that we may have overlooked, and you hope you haven't, but if we have, that will come through the contract process. So this is not an end all. This is just a good working plan, and I'm pleased with it, and I'm prepared to vote to approve it tonight.
Mr. Nolan?
I'll relate something that Becky has said more than once. If we are extremely lucky and we draw enough attention to what the problem is here now, there may be companies that's willing to come here and set up shop and don't even want any of our money, any of our property. They just want our trash. So there's a possibility that you could have companies set it, come here, try to put it, get permits to build a facility that we could use and not even be part of this RFP process.
And that's just a support for local business. That's not saying you're giving them anything. You're just supporting them by saying, yes, this is an industrial area. Yes, it makes sense that the traffic pattern would handle this volume of vehicles. Whatever those questions look like, especially to a company that's not familiar with Rutherford County. And that's just supporting local business. And if you bring infrastructure here and you're part of the decision making or part of guiding those decisions for a private company, but they bring the resources to build it, the infrastructure is there. You're welcome to use it. Now, it will have probably a tip fee or a price to it, but you'll have the infrastructure to for your community to use.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
On this scoring thing that we're probably going to talk about here in a little bit, or more in depth on the scoring thing,
Wait just a minute. Had you not rather finish this RFP before we get off into something else?
Yeah, I was just kind of relating it here.
Okay, go ahead.
That, even if they put X, Y, Z in the RFP here, Becky, I guess, but they don't put A, B, C in there within that negotiation of that contract or their RFP and reviewing it, we're going to have our time, or the committee is going to have their time to ask whatever company, okay, if you're doing this, why can't you do this? Or can you not do that? And that's where the rubber meets the road, I guess, on whether this is the right company to do what we're wanting to do, whether it be recycling, composting, mediating our landfill or whatever.
Sorry. I apologize for interrupting you. The idea of having the interviews or having the presentations from the RFI, that was an important component, but we didn't follow through on that simply because we had one that put pricing in their documents. I think in this case, the presentation piece will be critical for folks to come and actually tell us and answer those questions. It would appear on paper, or it would appear to us that you could potentially do this. Can you do that? Or have you ever tried that? Or did it work? Would you be willing to try that? So I think those are things that we could ask them if we would allow them to come and do a presentation for this committee or for the county commission, so that questions can be asked when there are, when folks are wondering those things.
Blair?
If we've concluded our discussion, I'm ready to make a motion to approve this RFP.
That's your motion?
That is my motion, Mr.
We'll need a
Chairman.
second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Anybody? We've put a lot of hard work into this. Took a lot of nights.
Amen.
Done, we're done. Call the roll, Rachel. Mr. Sereno.
Commissioner Dodd?
Yes.
Commissioner Harris?
Yes.
Commissioner P?
Yes.
Commissioner Blair?
Yes.
Commissioner Sereno?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Piercy?
Yes. Seems to be a unanimous vote. And that will enable our mayor to turn this loose, correct? Turn it out for bids?
We need to,
Take your mask off where you can hear. I said that vote will enable the mayor to turn this out to bids, correct?
we need to include the evaluation criteria.
Okay.
Would be the only piece.
All right, let's go over that. I'll let you lead the way.
Thank you. So what I put before you, or what Rachel had passed out before the meeting, was just some evaluation criteria, and these are things that we've talked about. Typically, what you do is you just give proposers an idea of what you're going to be looking at or what's most important to you. Certain things that are absolutely important, certain things that they're important, but if you don't have that, that's okay, and certain things that are low priority. Typically, those equal a certain amount. My recommendation would be 100 points total. So if you look at this list of bullet points to come up with that handful of things that are most important to you, I would say we stick with the things that are top priority that you want every company to. So in other words, I'll use the qualifications and experience. So if you're looking at that in an RFP, and we say, and this is just a number off the top of my head, if we say that's worth 10 points, and all of a sudden some resumes are included, they offer 3 references, but the references aren't very clear, do they get a 6 or 7 out of 10 versus a full 10 points? So that's the type of thing you'll be looking at once you get the RFPs in. And typically that's something we let a proposer know on the front end, is these are the things that we're going to be looking at, and this is the point scale or the grading scale, just like you would for for a class or anything like that. Anything you're reviewing, if you will.
So each point would be, each line would be worth up to 10 points?
You could do that, or we could say this is more, we could say public education is more important, so we could give it 15 points or 20 points, and then qualifications and experience are more important, 15 points or 20 points. Some things get 5 points. It's just a matter of what you want those points to be, what you want that spread to be. And if you want them all to be equally important, we can say 10 points each, and whatever that total looks like.
There's 11 statements, I guess you could say. So I guess 1 to 10, and 10 being the most important to that particular commissioner might work.
Is there anything in the 11 that may or may not belong there, or doesn't belong there? I'm seeing the last bullet point, performance measures, penalties for non-performance. We talked about that a little earlier as far as putting that in the contract versus the RFP. That's the last one on the list.
We were going to add that to the contract. So
So I'll take that one out.
is that okay to exclude that one since it's going to be a contractual issue?
Mr. Nolan?
Combine bullet point number 6 and bullet point number 11, then you have 10.
The committee be in agreement with that combination? Mr. Harris?
Well, what I'm concerned with, it says, you're talking about performance measures. Is that what you're talking about? Combining customer service? I mean, if we, I feel like customer service, if we smelt something or, something we won't fix right now, I think they should be separate. And I know it sounds like performance measures and all that stuff, but some could be simple and nothing, and we'd like customer service to take care of it. For instance, if there's a smell, then we expect them to fix it or, address it. Would that be safe to say?
So again, are we considering deleting the 11th bullet point, because they'll be in the contract?
I think I'd like to see them separate like they are.
Keep all 11?
Yes.
Do we want to put different point scales on them or have them all equal, or what's your wishes on that?
I think every one of them are important. I think every one of these are very important. I would like to see, I really don't want to see add 10 points to this one or that one. I'd like to see them all based on 10 points apiece, 110 points instead of 100, and look at them like that. Because what's important to me might not be as important to you. So I like it all being one simple thing.
Comments on his thoughts? Any
And
objections?
I'm good with that as well. I like the 1 to 10 scale, with 10 being, most important or most favorable, and go with the 110 point total. I'm good with that.
I agree too.
I am. Thank you.
Mr. Nolan?
I think bullet point number 9 should be the least important up front. It will become very important later.
And we'll ask that typically ask that that's in a separate envelope, in a separate sealed envelope, so that what you get is the proposal, and then you have a separate sealed envelope with the dollars or the financial information as far as cost, cost per unit or cost per service.
And if I may, Mac, to that point, with your influence on us voters, that may be of great importance to me, but not as much to Craig. So I think ultimately, I think we're going to default to the 11 because we've had some good guidance, and every commissioner is going to have to weigh all 11 to their desire. So I think Craig's point's good. This might make it, let us all weigh them individually. We'll come out with a total score is the concept, right?
Yes, sir. And it'll be on a scale of 0 to 110. The only other thing I would say is, what timeline do we want to put on this? When do we want to get these back, and do we want the same number of copies with the same format that we had for the RFI, as far as copies and a flash drive and that type thing?
We need to approve the evaluation criteria first. I'm just asking. A motion to approve this criteria.
We need a second?
Second.
Call the roll, right?
Commissioner P.,
Yes.
Commissioner Sharino,
Yes.
Commissioner Blair,
Yes.
Commissioner Dodd,
Yes.
Commissioner Harris,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Piercy.
Yes. Now,
I'm sorry.
what else
So
do you have, Beth?
So we need a date for, so the RFI was 11 copies and a flash drive, 11 hard copies and a flash drive were submitted. We asked that it was submitted by a specific date, and then we ask that any questions be in writing. And I can just copy that verbiage from the RFI. If we're happy with that, we just need to pick a date so that when would we want these RFPs to be returned?
First of all, did anybody have any problem with the 11 copies and the other? So that's good. So if this
The only thing I'm concerned with, Commissioner, is you're talking about days where I think 60 days is more than adequate enough, but we also got holidays in here. So we might have to look at a different date into the next year, because, I mean, December, I mean, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that's a lot of time. So do we want to look at that, or do we say, whatever, it's 60 days?
I feel like most of them's probably sitting on go, and they'll get it in a week's time. How long did we give them on the RFI?
I think we gave them 45 days, it looks like. June to...
Mr. Nolan?
Gave them 2
45
months.
days for an RFI, that's request for information. You're not drilling down into the numbers. These companies are going to have to really drill down into the numbers to give us a price, and they're going to have to do some studying, because we have not given them all the information they need. So they're going to have to make some phone calls and some other things. So 45 days, I think, is too short.
Too short.
Too short for this process.
So you think 60's?
Give them 90?
That,
It would put us around, give or take, the 3rd or 4th week of January, just in glancing at it. And we can give them a date certain instead of 90 days from now, so that there's, that's better.
We don't know how quick the mayor and vice mayor can get this sent, do we?
Becky.
I'll
Okay.
I'll get the changes made and get the final document to the mayor's office, and then we'll start to distribute it.
What was
I'm
that we had 2 out of the 13 or something that suggested something like 90 days because of, like you said, drilling down into the numbers.
Because of holidays.
I can't remember
And-
who that
and-
was, but now that we're into the holidays, 90 days might be more
Well, it's holidays,
comfortable
and I
in
think,
some of these companies. I don't know.
I think business has been a little bit different in 2020. I don't want to necessarily draw attention to that, but business has been a little bit different in 2020 for all of us. So I think that's something to take into account as well.
February 1st is a Monday.
Okay with February 1st.
Doc, you good? Mr. P, are you good with February 1?
Works for me.
Now, this is a deadline for submittal, correct?
Yes, sir.
We need to vote on that, or we're just going to all be in agreement?
I'd vote and make it official. So I make a motion that we end our deadline is February 1st.
Second.
Noon.
Everything?
Yes, I second 12 noon as well.
Motion and a second.
Mr. Sereno,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Dodd,
Yes.
Mr. Blair,
Yes.
Mr. P,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Piercy.
Yes. Do we have anything else?
Thank you.
Think we're done?
Aye.
Anybody else? Any comments? I would like to take the time to wish our mayor a happy anniversary. This seems to be his 37th anniversary today and tonight. Happy anniversary.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank
Yes, very much so. It would have took us a whole lot longer without them. A whole lot longer.
Me too. I told the gentleman this morning, I said the chairmen and committee members and mayor, vice mayor, working so hard. They went to East Tennessee, California, so he was happy to hear that.
Meeting adjourned.